So I'm doing a little bit of a series right now, or I'm going to be starting doing a series, I should say, on other classes other than Scourge. I know primarily do Necromancers on this channel. But with the new expansion, there's a ton of new skills in the game, there's a ton of new builds in the game, and it's very hard to, play reactively if you don't know what most of the skills going off are. So I'm making this series about each of the 9 classes' new elites and the new telegraphs and animations on each of those elites, just as kind of a quick intro guide to what you need to be looking out for when you're fighting these classes. I'm going to start with Spellbreaker since it's one of the more popular ones right now. And it's one of the ones where it can really penalize you if you don't know exactly what it's doing. So, I've got right here, this is a pretty standard Spellbreaker build. Now, some Spellbreakers will use the old healing sig that was the staple of the hot meta. I'm using this heal just because I like it, and because, since I'm introducing you to the new skills, it's best to kind of show off the newer ones. And I'll start off with the heal because it's a pretty basic heal animation. You stick your hand in there, it's the same animation that Necromancer has on Consume Conditions, complete with the blue glow. So if you see a warrior casting what looks like Consume Conditions, that's his heal. And it also basically works exactly like Consume Conditions. It eats all of the condies on the warrior. It also eats all of his boons, and then it heals him to full. So yeah, you definitely want to interrupt that, because, look at the base healing on this thing. Like, if you get that's just a fight reset skill, basically, is what that does. Featherfoot Grace. This is something I've been using on my Spellbreaker builds, and I see a lot of other warriors using it too. It's a low cooldown stun break that grants resistance, so it's good for replacing resistance if it gets ripped, which, given the amount of boon rip in the games right now, is something that a lot of warriors are looking at. This doesn't really have a telegraph, it's just they gain resistance, stun break, and super speed. Not really a telegraph to it so much. Moving on, Sight Beyond Sight. I haven't actually seen anyone using this, but it's kind of that weak animation. You don't really need to worry about this unless you're a thief. It makes their next attack a critical hit, but that's usually not important enough for most warriors to consider running it. So unless you're a thief, it doesn't really matter, because we, like Necros, don't care about reveal, and I'm pretty sure most of my audience is Necromancers. Imminent Threat, Taunt nearby foes. Again, not a huge animation. It's basically like a newer version of the old Fear Me shout, just with Taunt instead of Fear. More reasonable cooldown. I haven't seen anyone running this either, yet, but there it is. 1 sec, it's not something you'll really react to. And then break enchantments. Strike foes around you, remove your boons. AoE boon rip, you'll definitely be seeing this in World v World. Sorry. Yeah, not really in... That was the wrong button. SPV. That has a much bigger animation. Again, it's a 1 second cast, so it's not something you can realistically react to, but if you see that gold go out, you can identify that, yes, they're using break enchantments. And I'll play it for you again. Got that little sharp circle thing. And then the next one, and probably the most important, or the second most important thing, I should say, to understand on Spellbreaker is what their elite looks like. And you've probably already figured out this one, because it is the most obvious skill in the game. Massive Golden Dome. What does this dome do? It ruins your life, is basically what this dome does. So every half second, this dome will rip a boon from every foe standing under it, up to 10 targets. That's every half second, not every second. Most AoE skills pulse every second. No. This is pulsing every half second. So if you stay in it, it'll rip 2 boons from you every second. And it persists for 10 seconds. It also prevents you from gaining boons, which is really bad. You can't gain stability, you can't gain any kind of boon. And this is actually particularly nasty for like a power reaper. Because you get your life force generation. A lot of your life force comes from Blighter's Boon, which requires generating a boon to get life force from it. If you're in this dome, you can't even gain a boon. It's not just that it rips a boon, it also denies you from getting it. So you can't gain a boon, so you can't even gain life force from lighters if you're under this, if you're like a power reaper. So that's definitely something you want to watch out for. An SPVP, it has a 10 target limit, which means an SPVP, you're not going to be plowing through it because you're never going to hit that target limit. So it's just going to be ripping everyone and dying. Just don't stand in this thing. This is basically an automatic decap skill against the bunker. And in fact, I'm pretty sure in the tournament meta we might see Spellbreakers just for running onto a point that someone's bunking, dropping this dome on it, and you know, if you've got like a Tempest or a Scrapper bunking the point, the moment this goes down, like, they have to get off. Because if they're on point with that, they're just going to get wrecked. It's even more crazy in World v. World. In World v. World, it's absolutely insane, because in World v. World, if you dump that in a Zerg, you'll be hitting 10 targets every single tick. Which means the skill by itself, since it's going to be removing 2 boons per second from each foe and has 10 targets, that means it'll be ripping 200 boons over its 10-second duration. And once you throw in the fact that most World v. World warriors are using Enchantment Collapse, which removes a boon from all nearby foes when they rip a boon from one foe, and this has no IC, that means every single foe struck by the elite will also be AoE ripping, which means it actually comes up to 200 times 5. So yeah, you see where this is going. That's 1,000 boon rips right there from Enchantment Collapse. Not to mention all the boons it's denying to the people under it. So yeah, 1k boon rip. Get wrecked. Okay, moving on. And what I meant by 1k is that means the maximum possible is 1k if you drop that in a Zerg. And yes, the World v. World meta is already adapted to that. Moving on to weapon skills and such. I'm using a shield here. You know, it's standard warrior thing. Why did I bring my inventory up? I'm an idiot. Sorry. Oh, that's why I was looking for shield standard thing. Warriors gain both offhand and main-hand dagger. You won't really see offhand dagger in PvP. It does have 2 skills, so if you see a warrior doing that, he's using offhand dagger. That is a projectile destruct. It's pretty obvious. It doesn't do much other than damage. I mean, it does do noticeable damage, so, you know, just don't take it all to the face, but it's just a missile reflect. Wastrel's Ruin can be a bit nasty. It has a fairly high damage coefficient, if you look at it, and then it gives 100% damage coefficient if you're not doing anything. And it looks like that. Half-second cast. You probably won't really react to it. That's something you'd have to anticipate, because it is a very not obvious animation. However, again, you're not really going to see many warriors running offhand dagger, so that's not too much concern. Main hand dagger, you'll probably see a lot of warriors running this, along with a lot of the old staples of warrior like axe and mace. This has 3 skills. It's got the auto attack. It's the gold colored skill. Very obvious. And it's an okay auto attack if you're running a very glassy setup. You know, you can do okay-ish damage with it. It's not great. It's not the best auto attack damage in the game or anything. Aura Slicer. So this is where the Telegraphs and Spellbreaker can be a bit annoying to deal with. So Warrior has a number 2 skill, Aura Slicer, which is leap and inflict slow. Okay. And it does damage and it slows you, and the slow kind of sucks. But the F1 on Dagger is also a leap of the exact same range. Actually, slightly more range on the F1, but it's roughly the same range. And it's very hard to tell these apart, but you kind of need to tell them apart because first off, you want to avoid letting them hit F1s, because that's giving them adrenal health if they run that trait line. It may be giving them other procs depending on what traits they're picking. You just don't want to get hit by F1s, and it does boon rip you. It's ripping 2 boons. So you really want to avoid the F1. But the F2, you know, it's not as important to avoid. But at the same time, they do look the same, and that's kind of hard. The only real difference is the F1, it's kind of, you hold the dagger over here, whereas the F2, you do this weird thing where, like, your character, like, goes sideways and, like, tries to, like, backhand slap the target with the dagger. I don't really understand the weapon skill 2 animation. Like, it makes no sense physically. Like, you would never be able to do anything like that in real life. The F1 is more of an overhand swing. It's kind of hard to tell apart. Just if a warrior leaps at you with a dagger, just dodge it. You don't want to get hit with the F1 and just assume all leaps are F1. Unless you're really critical on dodge charges. The number 3 skill, it's an instant interrupt. Like, there's no cast, it's just instant. It's a daze, very short duration. It's basically a melee headshot with the cooldown. I wish the headshot had a cooldown. There's a little bit of damage, very quick. You're not going to dodge it, it is instant. You just maybe anticipate it, not really. It's just an interrupt skill. An important thing about interrupts is they do have this minor here where they inflict dazes, stuns, knockbacks, blah blah blah, rip a boon. Notice it says dazes, stuns, pulls, knockbacks, etc. It does not say interrupt a foe. This is some confusion I've seen people where they were thinking you had to interrupt to get the boon rip. No, 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 no. You just need to land a daze. If you land a daze, the foe gets boon ripped. It doesn't matter if they were casting anything that you interrupted or not. And then if they have, you know, loss aversion, so if you get interrupted, or, sorry, if you get dazed, wow, I'm making that mistake too. If you get dazed, and they have loss aversion, you take a little extra damage and warrior get adrenaline. A lot of warriors are also running slow counter, which is their part of their 3-way trait lines that buff the F2, which I'm going to go into now. So this is something, this has been causing a lot of controversy on the forums. This is probably the strongest skill on Spellbreaker, and it is baseline to Spellbreaker, no trading necessary. And what it does is if you hit them, they gain evasion, ignore the attack, and then stun everyone and deal damage in area. And it does pretty significant damage too. Like, that's a pretty significant damage coefficient on that. And of course, any other procs they have related to F skill usage, they'll also gain. Now, you do have to hit this. Excuse me, sorry. You do have to hit full counter to set it off. And it does look like this, so if you see a warrior doing this, try to avoid hitting it. Obviously, good warriors will only use that when they're expecting a hit to come in, which means if you're fighting a really good warrior, you're not really going to really avoid hitting it. And of course, it can also be triggered by AoE, so a warrior can intentionally jump in like a symbol in order to set it off, and it is an AoE stun. This can be kind of disgusting in a team fight. Particularly since, again, it goes back to this minor where if they land a daze or stun, which this is, it rips a boon. So, yeah, that can be quite nasty. So again, if you see this, don't hit it. Of course, it'll probably go off if they're good, because they'll probably be looking for skill. Now, if you do hit it, there is a time delay between the full counter being hit, so someone hitting the full counter and triggering it, and the damage and CC being applied. Which means you can, if you see a warrior doing that, hit the warrior, trigger it, and then immediately dodge row and avoid the full counter completely, thus negating the advantage. Now they will, if they're taking revenge counter, which most warriors in SPVP are taking, they will still get the resistance if they do that. But it denies him. Excuse me, I'm just yawning all over the place. It denies them any procs they might have been getting, like adrenal health or whatever from the skill. And that's the primary way to counter it. A lot of people in the forums have been whining about how hard it is to avoid setting it off. Well, really, you don't worry about setting it off. You just dodge it when it gets set off, and that avoids most of the problems. It is still a pretty punishing skill at an 8-second cooldown. It might get changed in the future. There's a lot of pressure on the ArenaNet to nerf it. A few other things about traits to know about Spellbreaker. They also have no escape dazes and stuns, afflict, immobilize. So like on Dagger 3, which, you know, that's a daze or full counter if they have this trait. That's gonna apply immob to you. Also, full counter will apply immob to under that same trait, because again, it doesn't have an ICD. That can be very punishing. Another thing to be aware is Aura Slicer. It is a leap skill, but it does not count towards the minor in... Oh, I'm in combat. Why did I put myself in combat? The minor in Discipline, where leaps and charges remove immobilize. This is probably a bug, but right now it does not count towards that, which means if you immobile warrior, they cannot break it with dagger 2. They would have to use another leap skill or resistance to break it. So that's just something bear in mind. Doesn't matter too much, but it's just something to understand. And I think that's basically everything you need to know. One other thing to be aware. A lot of I'm in combat again. Why am I in combat again? A lot of warriors have been playing around with hammers again, because again, this Spellbreaker does synergize well with CC. So, if you don't have much practice against hammers, because really hammer wasn't used much at all during Heart of Thorns, it's best that you learn these telegraphs, because this thing has a lot of punishing CC. And you will, I've seen at least 2 hammer warriors already. Although a lot of them, most warriors that I've been seeing have been running greatsword, just typical, but there are enough hammer warriors running around. It's something you're gonna need to be aware of. And it can be really punishing on a necromancer to get hit with that kind of CC. So that's just something to keep in mind.